There are forces that have always wanted to fundamentally change us. You know, the founders of this country were really some terrific people, and they were studious, and they studied every government system that ever existed in the history of the world because they wanted to take the good things and leave the bad things out and give us the kind of country that would last and would have freedoms for our people. But it was a rough go, and in that last constitutional convention in Philadelphia, the whole thing almost broke apart because there were so many disagreements about how it should be done. And then the elder statesman, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, came up and he said, "Gentlemen, stop. Let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from God." And they knelt and prayed, and they got up and they put together the Constitution of the United States, which I think is a God-inspired document if we will follow it.
That was Ben Carson. Carson is a former brain surgeon and former Secretary of Health and Human Services during the first Trump administration. In 2024, he released a book, and as he was talking about it at a public event, he told that story about Ben Franklin and prayer at the Constitutional Convention. Did you recognize the part of the story that wasn't true? Did you recognize the Christian past that wasn't? Hi, this is Warren Throckmorton, and this is the final regular episode of the Christian Past That Wasn't podcast. If you have read or are reading the book, The Christian Past That Wasn't, I hope you heard the false part of the story told by Ben Carson there. Carson claimed that Franklin called the delegates to kneel and pray. He said they did so, and the Constitution was rescued. That part was false. In fact, Franklin moved to secure a clergyman to offer prayers each morning before the start of business, but after some discussion, the delegates adjourned without voting on the motion. The convention never came back to Franklin's motion. Franklin later recorded in his diary that only 3 or 4 delegates thought prayer was necessary. They did not kneel and pray, as Carson claimed they did. In the book, there are many stories like this. Some are totally false, some are exaggerated, and some are irrelevant to the central myth of an intentional Christian founding. If you haven't gotten your copy, there's no time like today. During the season of the broadcast, I have been tracking along with the chapters of the Christian Past That Wasn't, and today corresponds to the conclusion. In the second part of this segment, I want to play a rare admission for you. Call this a worried Christian nationalist concession. Just yesterday, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary President Al Mohler posted a short video titled, quote, "The Need for the Acknowledgement of Christianity's Role in the American Founding," end quote. Actually, what Mohler does is admit that the founders did not acknowledge Christianity as the foundation for the American experiment in the Constitution. This is significant. In my book, The Christian Past That Wasn't, I talk about Christian nationalists who claim the Constitution quotes the Bible verbatim and claim that the delegates sought answers in the Bible for how to write the document. At least, Mohler admits the obvious. So I am going to play the whole clip and comment further on the other side.
When the American experiment and the American experience began, there was no question that the basic worldview behind everything was the biblical worldview of Christianity. That worldview and that worldview alone explained how the cosmos came to be. That worldview and that worldview alone explained who human beings are and why human beings possess dignity. That worldview and that worldview alone reflected the majesty of the law and the authority of law, the promise of the rule of law. And all of that was premised upon a worldview that was explicitly established by Christianity. And that didn't begin with the beginnings of the United States of America. That goes back in history into Western civilization, a civilization once called Christendom, in which all the major claims of the civilization were based explicitly upon Christianity. The influence of biblical Christianity alone explains the moral impulses that came to the creation of Western civilization and to its extension here in North America and what became the United States of America. Is America a Christian nation in terms of explicit constitutional statement? No. And I think it's safe to say it wasn't considered necessary at that point. But I do believe that's a problem for us now, because there is no constitutional acknowledgement of the fact that the basic background beliefs that make even the claims and the assumptions of the Constitution meaningful, if those Christian assumptions are excluded, if they're forgotten, if they are denied, then we are in very big trouble. And the constitutional experiment that was begun in terms of the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, it can be undone by those who are seeking to sever it from anything beyond itself in terms of authority and meaning and truth. So I think that was an error. It was understandable at the time that those who were framing the Constitution, well, let's just put it this way, they did not foresee a secular age coming. But in that secular age, we realized without the acknowledgement of Christianity, we have to make all kinds of arguments that would otherwise not be necessary. In our age, they're necessary. These are important arguments, moral arguments, arguments about the meaning and the dignity of life, arguments about something as basic as marriage and human civilization. It's up to us now to continue to make those arguments, and make them we must.
Although there are many problems with Al Mohler's clip, there is one refreshing element. He admits there is no Christian acknowledgement in the Constitution. Even though he said it was understandable at the time, he laments that it was an error that the founders didn't include Christian language. However, I submit it was not an error. It was done deliberately, and it was brilliant, in my opinion. It allows religion to flourish. It goes some distance toward a level playing field when it comes to religion. It prevents tyranny by Christian nationalists, and it keeps the government from meddling in religious work. Error? Hardly. As Randall Balmer says, separating church and state may be America's best idea. Mohler says there are people who are trying to sever the Constitution from Christian assumptions, or as he says, quote, anything beyond itself, end quote. I have news for Dr. Mohler. The Constitution's framers already did that. Article 6 of the Constitution contains the Supremacy Clause and the No Religious Test Clause. The last two paragraphs of Article 6 read as follows, quote, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States, end quote. The framers severed the Constitution from religion. No one is doing it now, and Mohler can't attach it except in his own mind. However, attaching Christianity to the Constitution is just what Mohler would like to do. Somehow, Mohler claims that everything, quote, when the American experiment began, end quote, had a biblical worldview. Even though this is reductionistic fantasy, I would like to hear Mohler's explanation of how the biblical worldview led to American moral impulses to own slaves and regulate enslavement based on race. Mohler says that only the biblical worldview explained who human beings are and why they possessed human dignity. Were the moral impulses to consider Africans and native people less than human also based on biblical foundations, Dr. Mohler? Even the Orthodox founders were influenced by Enlightenment and classical thinkers as well as their religious training. Furthermore, many founders were not Orthodox Christian. Mohler may be able to admit what is plain to see in the Constitution, but remember, he sees that as a mistake. He thinks the founding was all Christian, and that was all good. He just thinks the founders should have put it all in the Constitution. He glosses over a full account of the ideas which influenced the founding and the morally checkered past of the nation. Mohler closes by exhorting his listeners to make biblical arguments regarding public policy. As long as he stays away from the Christian founding pitfall, it's fine to make his case. But he has to make those arguments on their merits. This is all any of us can do. In the conclusion of the book, The Christian Past That Wasn't, I quote Greg Forster making a point about how we should think about our neighbors in society. I want to play that clip here.
When we tell a story about the American founding that reduces the American founding to more or less a political expression of a certain kind of Protestant Christianity, right? Not Protestant Christianity generally, heaven forbid, but this specific kind of Protestant Christianity. Then we collapse the distinction between our religious beliefs and the political community that we live in. And it causes us not to recognize that the same rights claims that we make on behalf of our rights can be made on behalf of other people in reverse. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was when I read a letter that got published shortly after the American Revolution by a Jewish man who was writing into a Philadelphia newspaper. And the state of Pennsylvania had passed a law that you could not vote if you did not think that the New Testament was the Word of God. And to put the requirement in exactly that way is clearly intended to exclude Jewish people. And this man wrote a very powerful letter in which he said, everyone will testify that the Hebrew people have been true and faithful Whigs. And in context, what that means is they supported the revolution. We've been true and faithful Whigs. We have fought and bled and died for a freedom that we cannot enjoy. And that just hit me like a freight train. Now, it's not the first time I've ever thought of that idea, but to hear it expressed in such a powerful way. So I tell that story now when I hear from my fellow Christians who think that America needs to be just simply and straightforwardly a Christian nation, and who aren't open to the idea that America belongs to all Americans regardless of their religious beliefs, and who don't want to allow equal participation in the political system. So look at controversies in the world today. We demand the right as Christians to live our own lives our own way, but are we prepared to allow other people to live their lives their way? Are we prepared to recognize their conscience rights in the same way that we expect our conscience rights to be respected? And when people say, as a way of complaining, secularism is in our schools, they'll say secularism is a religion, and that's why it shouldn't be taught in schools. And I shoot back, if secularism is a religion, then secularists have conscience rights, don't they? It means that under freedom of religion, they have a right to organize their lives. Now, I agree. I don't want my children indoctrinated into secularism, but I also don't want their children indoctrinated into my beliefs either. That's what rights are all about. That's what the American experiment is all about. You raise your children in accordance with your conscience, and I'll raise my children in accordance with my conscience. But people lose track of that when they think that the American system for protecting people's rights and having people live together in peace is simply an expression of a certain kind of Protestant religion. They don't recognize, that it's something else. And it makes room for this kind of Protestant religion, but if it's going to have integrity, it needs to make room for people of other religious beliefs as well.
That resonates with me. I know it sounds simple, but it is a principle that has been endorsed by some pretty impressive moral teachers, right? The divine author of our religion, as George Washington put it, endorsed that teaching. It seems to me we should endorse it as well and try to live by it. There is so much that Jesus taught that today's Christian nationalists do not want to acknowledge. When we get away from the separation of church and state, we get away from the golden rule. If I insist on my religion being merged with the state and being enforced in any way by the state, then it becomes an imposition on you. At that point, the risk is very great that I have done to you something I don't want done to me. If I actively work to get the state to take my side in religious matters, then I am not treating you the way I want to be treated. I certainly don't want your religion to dominate me, so I shouldn't want my religion to dominate you. During the first episode of the podcast back in 2024, I played a clip of David Barton testifying in front of the Texas Education Committee in favor of a law which requires the Ten Commandments to be posted in every Texas classroom. The law does what Greg Forster warns us not to do, elevates one religious expression over all others. In a later hearing, Texas Representative John Bryant questioned Barton and attorney Matt Krause about the fairness of requiring non-Christian Texas school children to be forced to sit in classrooms where the Ten Commandments are posted. First, Bryant makes a case that the requirement is a religious requirement. The person who answers Bryant is Matt Krause, a former Texas state representative and current commissioner on the Tarrant County Board of Commissioners.
And you asked or made the comment earlier that it only has God in a few places. So let me read to you what's in the bill here. It says, I am the Lord thy God. All right. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. I'll skip the next line. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thou may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Now, are you maintaining that that's not religious?
I don't believe I ever said that I did not think the Ten Commandments were religious. I think it's inescapable that it's religious in nature. That's
everybody
the very
agrees with
essence
that, right?
of it. What I was saying from a constitutional perspective is when we had the Lemon Test from 1971 to 2022, there was almost a presumption of unconstitutionality if it was religious. But now
I'm on the should we, not on the could we. Okay, I'm not interested in a constitutional debate here, because it will be litigated and somebody will decide if this passes. I'm just talking about what we heard Mr. Tallarico talk about, and I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, about a child in the classroom who is not a Christian or a Jew seeing on the wall Christian Jewish scripture. That's really what's at stake here. Yeah. And the question that I previously asked Mrs. Noble, we're a nation of all kinds of people, all kinds of faiths. And in order to hold it together, we have a constitution which makes some rules. The basic idea is whatever we pay for with our tax money, all of us together, that money is not used to raise up one person's religion over another person's religion. Yet this bill says, to come to another question that was raised earlier with regard to, are we forcing anything? A public elementary or secondary school shall display in a conspicuous place in each classroom of the school a durable poster or framed copy of the Ten Commandments that meets the requirements of subsection B, which is the wording that I just read a moment ago. Now, we are requiring every classroom to have it, and the words come right out of the Christian Jewish Bible, and half of them are talking about God or the Lord, or making one reference or another to a deity. Now, how do we ask non-Christians and Jews to pay taxes and non-religious people to pay taxes to build a building and put our words, which I revere as much as you do, on the wall of that classroom and call that fair?
Representative Bryant threw the question of fairness back to Matt Krause. Krause's answer is revealing and provides all the reason I need to write books like The Christian Past That Wasn't.
And I think you go back to the fact that it wasn't our choice that the founding fathers used that document to build a lot of the foundational laws and structures and principles that we have. But that fact is inescapable as well. That's what they used. And I think it's good and it's right for us to remind students of those foundations of law and those foundations of society that our country was built upon. And I think it's good for them to remember that.
Krause goes right to the heart of the Christian Nationalist Project. He claims the nation's system of government was built in some direct way on the Ten Commandments. He claims that the founders, quote, used that document, end quote, to build laws and structures. Where's the evidence that the founders used the Ten Commandments to write the Constitution? Read the debates of the Constitutional Convention. You simply won't find that evidence. However, Christian nationalists in the present must claim that the founders based our system on Christianity so they can claim religious supremacy now. It is really the only basis for the outrageous claim that Christian symbols should dominate all others or have any place in a public school. As the hearing proceeds, Bryant exposes the political agenda of those favoring the Ten Commandments in schools.
I mean, let's be real with each other here. You've got a religious motive for wanting to see this on the wall.
No, as a constitutional attorney, what I want to see is a restoration of what the expressions that we used to have in this country that we lost in 1980 by a flawed test and a bad opinion by the Supreme Court. I want to get us back that status quo ante that we had for 1789 to 1980. We should get back to that because I think that was well and good.
Thank you. With all due respect, I'm not buying that. I'm thinking about the people that I represent. I represent 200,000 people like everybody else up here. Just take them. I've got every kind of person in my district. We have schools that have where there's 20 languages that are spoken there, and they're trying to get everybody to speak in English. They come in from all over the world, or their parents did. They're Americans. We have people been here generations and generations that are not Christians and Jews. And you're asking us to put Christian and Jewish language on the wall of classrooms that they paid for. That's not fair, and that's not American.
It probably comes as no surprise that I agree with Representative Bryant. John Bryant didn't buy what Matt Krause was selling, and neither should you. I wrote The Christian Past That Wasn't to help distinguish between fact and fiction, and that is something, at the end of the day, that you can buy. I hope you've enjoyed this season of the podcast as much as I've enjoyed putting it on. If you are new to the program, go back and check out the first 2 seasons. You can find the book, The Christian Past That Wasn't, at christianpast.com or anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Walmart, Target currently have it for 25% off retail. Many local bookstores also carry it on the shelves. If you like the music of the podcast, you can look up the Christian Past That Wasn't playlist on Spotify or Amazon and enjoy full-length versions of many of the songs played throughout the 3 seasons. As always, thanks for listening.